the refresh, honestly, is pretty easy and straightforward. So we'll stop the project. We'll go back to our XML utility. Get all users. Start out with our data set. So we get the data set. We'll then grab our data table. And then we will create a list of user. And that's an empty list. Then we'll do a for each data row in users table dot rows. And then we'll do a method. This will be user u equals build user from row, passing in the row. And then all users dot add u. And the last step will return all users. Pretty easy. This method needs to be implemented. So what we do here is, I'm going to do this quick and kind of shorthanded. Return new user. First name equals row, first name. My goodness, I'm sorry. Dot toString. Last name equals row, last name. Dot toString. Email equals row, email. toString. That's all it needs to be done. Now this could be more complex depending on what we're dealing with, but for this scenario right now it's fairly simple and straightforward. So now if we go back to form 1, I'm going to add a call on the form load. So here I'm going to call refresh data list. And then inside of our data list, we'll create an instance of our XML user utility. And then we'll say list user data source equals null. Data source equals user util dot get all users. And that refresh doesn't really happen. So instead of having that static in-memory list like we had last week, we're doing that call to the XML document through the utility, and the utility will get us a list of users. Now the one final step that we need is we need to override toString so that the data that comes up in the list box is correct. So we'll go to user, override toString, and we're going to return what we want. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to do string.format. And that string becomes my layout template. Scroll up here. So that defines what the layout of my result string should look like. And then I do comma, and then I just pass in string values, one representing each one of these tokens. So 0 is the first item. So this will be first name. Let me actually do this. Last name, email. So 0 is first name, 1 is last name, 2 is email. Let's start. I'm surprised that didn't load. Let me stop that. Let's go back in here and do breakpoint, and we'll start again. Still says a file doesn't exist. So I'm going to highlight all of this. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say add to watch. This brings up the watch panel, and it's probably hard to see, but what it's doing is it's taking that line of code and it embedded it in your name, and then it's giving me the output value as the result, which is false. So it's reporting that that's false. What I'm curious to know, and I can actually manipulate this code here, is where it's looking. I don't think it's going to give me that. So because of that, we may have to manipulate this a little further. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a constructor. I'm going to call it data path. Now I'm going to create a private underscore data path. I'll say data path equals data path without the underscore. So I'm saving it somewhere. So now instead of passing in this all the time, I'll just say underscore data path. So it'll be these three spots. Okay. So now my utility is kind of independent. I can use it to save files and load files from multiple locations. I'm not tied to that one location, that one file name. The UI now makes the decision where to load and save the file. So we could actually extend our application and say, oh, do file open, and then we can choose what XML document we want to read from. In our case, we're just going to statically set it. So private string app data source will be the name of my variable. And then as part of the form load, I'm going to say app data source equals application dot executable path and now this includes the actual name of the executable, but what I want is just the path part. So I'm going to use the system.io.path utility. And this is one of those things that you just kind of learn by Googling. We're going to get directory name, passing in that path. And what that'll do is that'll give us back just the directory part without the executable file name. So let's actually break this into multiple steps. So we'll do string directory, string file name, and then we'll say string, and we'll just do app data source equals system.io.path.join. Is it not path? Oh, combine. And then we'll pass in directory, comma, file name. And then every time we have a new XML user utility, we'll just say this.app data source, which appears to be the one time there. What do I want to do here? So this is where things kind of become interesting. So I'm going to have to push it into my other form. So I have to go into there, modify its constructor, and give it an app data path parameter. And then we can say private string app data path here. So we're creating another private. So now this lives within the scope of this class, so I want to be clear on that. So this is actually a different variable than the one we just declared on the other form. And that's why we have to pass that path into the constructor of our add user form, because we actually have to push it there. Or the other option is we recalculate it again, copying the code that we just used here. But in this case, I'm just going to pass it as a parameter. So that parameter passing is happening here. This is form 1. This is the add button click. And I'm actually, when I create my add user form, I'm passing in that app data source. So I called it app data source here, and then I called it app data path here. So that actually kind of helps. So they're not the same. The value is the same, but the variable is different. So I take it here, I store it here, and then inside of this XML utility, I do this dot app data path. So let's save. Now we should be able to start. It should check for the file. It does exist now because it's looking at my C user Kevin's documents, Visual Studio, bin/debug/data source.xml. So it's looking explicitly at the path that my executable is. Looking for data source.xml. Hit play, and then there's my user. So I can hit add user. It'll go through all this save code again. It'll do a refresh. And now we have 2 users. There's our 3rd user. If I jump back into this folder, I open this XML document, and there's all 3 of our users in the XML document. Now, since we're short on time, I won't get into the delete and update. I'll cover that maybe at the beginning of next lecture, unless you guys want to sit around for another 5 minutes while I do it. How about this? That can be class. I'll go ahead and record the rest, so if you want to stick around and watch and ask questions, you're welcome to do that.